Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Grief, the emotional shitstorm you never signed up for. I'm Margaret Dennis, your host. I'm a women's life empowerment and holistic grief coach, and I work with primarily women who've been through grief and trauma. Today, I am very excited to welcome my guest, Tammy Adams. She is a certified advanced grief recovery method specialist. So, we're going to talk a little bit about that. And before we bring Tammy on, I just want to read her bio so you have an idea of who she is. All right, Tammy, welcome. So, Tammy Adams loves to problem solve, inspire, and motivate others who are ready and committed to change. She has spent over 30 years in the field of education, infant to post secondary, and as a certified coach, Tammy teaches individuals to challenge and conquer their limiting beliefs and insecurities to create the life of their choosing. As an advanced grief recovery specialist, Tammy understands unresolved grief can limit an individual's capacity for happiness and is gifted at supporting individuals through the pain and isolation caused by an emotional loss of any kind to a place of happiness they believe no longer existed. Tammy's clients say, Tammy helped me unpack the baggage and put a smile on my face in the process. It's a rare quality for someone to fully listen without judgment, yet still steer you in the right direction. Welcome, Tammy. I'm so excited to have you here. We only met
Oh,
a
thanks for
couple of
having
months
me.
ago. A couple of months ago. It's been lovely. Oh, it's great. Well, welcome to today. So, as you may have all understood from the introduction, we are going to be covering grief today. We're going to be talking more about grief and what it is, what it isn't, and how to recognize and a little bit more, not generic topic. I know some of our topics in the past have gone right into like infertility or a specific type of grief. Today we're going to be talking about grief on an educational way so that people really, who those of you who are listening in, really can get an understanding of what it is. So, Tammy, you are an advanced grief recovery specialist and you use the grief recovery method in your coaching. Can you share with the listeners what that is in sort of like the Coles Notes version of what that might be?
Yeah, the Coles Notes version, I think it's really important to know where it came from.
Sure.
There was a gentleman by the name of John James. He was married, he had a little girl, his wife delivered a son, and a few days later, the son died. And, he said, I had experienced loss in my life, never on this level.
Mm-hmm.
And he did all the traditional things. He listened to the speakers, he went to the workshops, he went to the doctor, he saw a therapist, but he said nothing was helping. And he was really reaching that point where he was really considering checking out because the pain was just so bad. And he went home and he developed this process solely for himself because he knew if he didn't get on the other side of this emotional pain, there was nowhere else for him to go. And so he sat down and he created this process. So there's a system to this. It's kind of an education program. And people saw such a change in him. They literally started to knock on his front door and say, I want what you have. And at the time, he was a solar contractor. He built houses. Like he
Mm-hmm.
wasn't a therapist, he wasn't a doctor. He was just a griever who found a way through this. And he actually got so busy doing this in the living room of his house that he had to close his business. And he dedicated the rest of his life to that. So there are now people like me all over the world who've been trained in facilitating his method. And what people do is they sign up and they work with me for 8 weeks because each week builds on the next. And through that process, they identify what's been left unfinished. They learn the proper steps to complete that emotional pain, which allows your body to neutralize the trigger and release the emotional pain. So that's kind of Cole's Notes version.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And I love that there's different ways out in the world for people to address their grief, work through healing their grief, because as you and I both know, everyone is unique. Their pain is unique. You may have been in the same room and experienced the same thing, but you experience it differently.
Yep.
on your own. And so it's, I love that there's different methodologies out there that people can connect with and find the ones that align with them. So I love that you're offering this method as an option for people to explore. Thank you. So is grief only death and divorce, or are there other reasons that we might grieve?
So we've been conditioned to think it's death. I've had people say to me all the time, Tammy, I'd take your program if you didn't call it grief, right?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have anyone who died. I'm not divorced. I didn't go through a breakup kind of thing. But there are over 40 reasons why we might grieve. And some of them are obvious, the death of a loved one, the death of a pet, maybe a move that you didn't expect, a broken friendship, those kinds of things. But then there's another section because there are over 40 reasons. And the second section are those things that choices we've made that we know are in our best interest, or things that we identify as happy. So getting married, getting a promotion, having a baby, these are things that we put in the happiness box. But what we don't realize is there can be conflicting emotions that surround those choices and those changes. And if we don't resolve those conflicting emotions, we will sabotage the choices we have made. So there's those happiness things. And then there's another category that is more abstract. It's a loss of trust, a loss of faith, a loss of control, a loss of freedom, a loss of structure, like, a whole bunch of different things. And so, because we are focused primarily on death, dying, and divorce, then we miss those other 40 plus reasons. And as you know, those emotions that are left unresolved, those conflicting emotions that are not completed, they don't go anywhere. They
Mm-hmm.
just keep building and building and building and building.
Yeah.
And, I often in my workshops use the example of the person who won the lottery. And most, not all, but a high percentage of people who win the lottery end up with less money than they had before they started. And I really believe a lot of that is driven by the fact they don't grieve that sudden change.
Mm.
And so they can't resolve this new lifestyle that they have, and so they find ways to sabotage it.
Yeah. Wow. Yes, we think very, very similarly. And I think that there's a lot out there as well that talks about the different types of grief. But you're right. We don't really get that information as much as we should. In
No.
my practice, I've developed a grief assessment that has 30 things on it that I
Yeah.
give to people to have a look and just give a hand. Like, and it includes some of the happiness, some of the abstract, and then definitely the ones that we've identified. I think it's really good that people know that it can be the loss of trust and those more abstract feelings because we are left with this feeling but not really sure what to do with it. And so you're right, it gets pushed down and we layer and layer and layer. Yeah. Well,
I
thanks for
I think
explaining.
one, well, and I think one of the most misunderstood griefs is motherhood,
Mm,
because we create this euphoric experience,
mm-hmm,
right? We don't talk about the life we've left. We don't talk about our lack of freedom. We don't talk about all the negative things like the sleep deprivation. And, maybe if you take that mat leave, what job am I going back to? Will I go back to the same job? I know they have to hold a position, but they don't have to necessarily hold your position. And so mothers aren't given permission or the tools to grieve this massive change. We're both moms. You
mm-hmm,
know what that first baby does in
mm-hmm.
turning your life upside down. So think about it. You're a mom, you're struggling with all these grief emotions. You're looking around at all your friends, and everybody's kind of doing the Academy Award performance. I'm fine. So then you don't feel like you've got permission to say, but I'm exhausted.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't what I signed up for. And again, those emotions get pushed down and
Mhm.
pushed down and pushed down. And it's really hard for a new mom to really embrace this new experience because they were never allowed to grieve the
Mhm.
loss that came with that change.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Thanks for sharing that. Thanks for sharing
Mm,
that. With that too, when we're just to add, a little bit more to the grief side of things too, is what I find when I'm working with my clients, and I'm sure you've noticed it with yours, is especially when it comes to when we're talking about moms and they're looking around seeing everybody's got that Academy Award performance. When they're feeling that grief, they're also judging themselves for feeling the grief. And so their sense of being a failure already, like, why can't I be excited and happy about being a mom? Why can't I have all my shit together? Why
yeah,
can't I have all of this? And there's that self-judgment piece that comes along with it too, which intertwines with the grief of the loss and the not, the way life has changed. So I
yeah.
think there's a lot that grief is not just the sadness and the loss. There's so many other emotions and things that come into play. Motherhood was a great example for sure. I don't think any of us are ever really truly prepared for becoming a mom. We want to be. We've seen how awesome it is in the movies. Um, but when you become a mom, it's a big awakening, that's for sure. I
Mhm.
don't think many of us would ever go back and change it, but there's still that process, like you said, of grieving the life that you've lost and grieving how things are not how you expected them to be.
And I think, and I'm speaking for myself because I didn't have any of these tools when I
Mm-hmm.
first got pregnant and had my first baby. But I think well, I know what happened for me is not only was I grieving these losses, but I was becoming aware of the symptoms of grief that I was experiencing, not realizing it was grief. Because as I faced this massive change, these other things were kind of nudging me and poking me and trying to get my attention that they needed to be addressed.
Mm-hmm.
But because I didn't have the tools and I reached for what I already had, I buried them. I
Yep.
distracted myself. I stayed busy. And so that huge opportunity for healing and moving into this role, like I say, much differently. Now I just dragged all that, as you say, shit with me.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure I didn't show up as the best mom I could have shown up as because I had too much baggage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we all go through that. We all bring our baggage to the table. And going through becoming a mom, no matter how that happens for people, whether they're adopting, whether they're able to have their own children, whether they use a surrogate, whether they inherit, like some people inherit the children from family members who can no longer look after them, like
Yeah.
however you become a mom. And some of us are moms in like stand-in roles. We're really great aunts, or we're really great, the friends of the friend, and we take on those mothering roles. Maybe we're foster moms, and maybe we work in the system where we mother children and there's all of those emotions that come along with it, and there's always that sense of loss. I do love that you brought up the idea of the connection of loss with happiness as well. And that's that motherhood piece, right? Falls right
Mhm.
into there. We're always so excited to become a mom, but we really, really don't know what it's like. So,
No.
for all you contemplating motherhood out there, be prepared. And for all of you who are moms, oh, we get it. We totally understand. All right. Well, let's move on. I got a few questions for you today. So the second one I have is, are there stages to grief in what you've seen and what you've worked with?
No. Now, based on the model that I use, when I was going through my training, the biggest shock that I had was that there aren't stages to grief, right? Anyone in this helping counseling profession, we're all taught the 5 stages of grief. And to learn that the 5 stages of grief are for the dying. They were designed for the dying. And when you look at them, they make sense. Negotiating, depression, moving forward to acceptance. Yes, it makes sense. But what we do is we try to force fit the living into a model that was designed for the dying. So that was the biggest piece of awareness. No, there are for the dying, but not for the living. And then the second thing is what you've already introduced. Everyone will grieve, the living person, everyone will grieve differently. And it's based 100% on our relationship with that person or that event. So, say you and I are siblings and our mother has died. We are going to grieve that loss completely different based on our relationship. And if you were the favored one and I was, say, the black sheep, well, of course, we're going to grieve it much differently.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's a really good question to allow people to realize the five stages of grief were never a grief support tool for the living, and the fact that everyone will grieve differently.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I 100% agree with that. I have not been a fan of the stages for a long time. I think the stages are, like you said, they were designed by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross for those who are going through the dying process. And I think when people are grieving, they're starting to go, well, what stage am I at? Where am I at? How do I fit into this? It just adds extra stress.
Yeah.
What I love to do with my clients, and I'm sure you do it with your clients as well, is just validate how you feel in this moment, right? Are you feeling angry? Because anger can be part of grief. And oh, anger is one of those stages, right? So sometimes we misinterpret our own feelings and figure we're in this stage. Not everybody reaches acceptance after they've lost a loved one. We can't really bargain, like we maybe will bargain, but
Oh,
how does that work? So what I always encourage people to do is just focus on how you're feeling and try not to judge yourself for how you're feeling. I have clients who are come to me who are really still angry, or they're full of resentment, or there's this sense of relief and they better not say it out loud, because what if they say they're really relieved that this person has passed, and then they're going to feel guilty because they feel relieved. Well, if that person's been fighting cancer for the last 4 years, their passing is a blessing for both them and those who were supporting them. It's really hard, but or some, maybe you feel joy, maybe this loss, like you said, I'm getting married, I'm feeling this, this loss, but I'm really happy. And there's these conflicting emotions, and all of these emotions compounding in, and people are confused, I think, sometimes, because you will react in ways that you may not even think that you would. Like if you come out of something and you're really resentful and angry, you might be like, where did that come from? Why am I feeling this? That's the moment you need to take the time to sit with yourself and dig in and find out where that's coming from, or reach out to a coach, reach out to a therapist, reach out to somebody who can support you in working through those feelings. But removing the judgment of what you're feeling and recognizing that you're going to feel all kinds of emotions, including sadness. Or what about those who go through the loss and don't feel sadness at all? They just feel the other emotions. So there's so many misconstrued ideas out there about what you're supposed to feel and how you're supposed to behave and what it's supposed to look like. Giving yourself permission to let it be whatever it is probably the biggest gift you can give yourself.
and I think too, if you go back to our childhood and what we're taught.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say you're a child and you've come home and you've done really, really well on a test. So your parents will encourage you to share that good news. They will share in that good news. They will probably call grandma and tell grandma the good
Mm-hmm.
news. But say I'm a child and I come home and on that particular day I got bullied at school. Well, even as parents, we don't have the tools. So we want to shut down that conversation because we don't have the tools to support. And we feel uncomfortable when our kids have been hurt. And so we learn really quickly to either deny the emotion or replace the loss because we'll be distracted with a cookie or let's put a video on or
Mm-hmm.
let's go shopping or whatever. And so there's this kind of taught response to a loss that sharing good news is acceptable, but sharing sad news, well, not so much, you know?
Yes. And that leads right into the next question of why don't we want to talk about grief?
Ah. And I think so much of that is driven by number one, we don't have the tools
No.
to have that conversation. We feel uncomfortable. And what do we do as humans when we feel uncomfortable, right? We change the subject, we move
Mm-hmm.
away. And, you know, one of the things that clients will say to me is someone will ask me how I'm feeling. And it takes a lot of courage for me to step up on that stage and say, I'm really sad. But we've been taught that empathy or sympathy is shown by sharing our story. So what we do is we knock that person off the stage, you know, not violently, but
Mm-hmm.
right. And we step up and we start sharing our story. And that really isn't what grievers need. What they
Yeah.
need is just someone to hold space, to be a heart with ears, and just to listen. But I think for so many of us, we're trying to paint a room with a screwdriver,
Mm.
right? We don't have the tools.
Yeah.
And really, we're just making a mess. We're making a mess as grievers, we're making a
Mm-hmm.
mess as supporters. And that's why these conversations that you and I are having are so important because grief is a part of life and it
Mm-hmm.
needs to be a normal and accepted process.
Mm-hmm. It does. It does. And you touched on a really good point when you were saying, well, people will change the subject because they get uncomfortable and they're not sure how to do it. And you're right, we have not taught people how to deal with grief, how to support someone through grief. And we're both out there trying to teach people now how to do that. I have a theory that part of the reason we don't actually when someone's grieving and the other person that's trying to support them gets so uncomfortable is because their brain, their reptilian brain, the one that's wired for survival, sees that grief as a threat, but it
Yeah.
cannot distinguish between a physical threat and an emotional threat. All they know is that that will hurt, right? And so there's that moonwalk out of there when people are like, oh, I when I did my TED talk, that's how I opened my speeches. Was, you go into a room and it's okay to talk about stress. You walk into the office and you're like, oh my God, I pulled an all-nighter, it was so stressful, and everybody gathers around you like, buddy, I hear you, I've been there too. There's that camaraderie and that support. You walk into the office and say, oh, you know what, I'm really really struggling today, I'm really sad because my dad died. Pin drops.
Yeah.
You might get a couple of people coming over going, I'm really sorry for your loss, would you like a coffee or a biscuit? Like it's, and I think food is probably one of, in North America anyway, food is a big sign of caring. We don't know what the words are, but I don't know how many casseroles I got when my son died. I had a freezer full, it was great, we didn't have to eat for a long time, but people didn't know what to say, so they brought food, which we really do appreciate. But yeah, the whole idea of running away from this emotion, and even us as the person, like you've said, when we're experiencing the grief, it's freaking us out too, so we push it down and we keep ourselves distracted and busy, which is a coping mechanism for a while. Eventually you have to face it if you want to move through it. I always equate it as it's the fire you have to walk through. You can't dodge it, you can't go around it, you can't bury it because it will be there. And eventually the grief will come out, usually in ways you don't want it to. Depression, anxiety, skin rashes, stomach issues, impatience, lack of sleep, headaches. Your body starts to tell you, and your emotion. I don't know how many people out there are so quick to fuse to anger or to tears. Things will tip them off. So yeah, it's unfortunate that no, we haven't made grief just a regular topic at the table, and I think there is quite an industry that is trying to move that to be more of a conversation, but it's a hard conversation. It is a hard conversation.
And, you know, if your listeners could think of grief as a beach ball,
Mm-hmm.
right? So now take that beach ball and push it under the water.
Mm-hmm.
So you can hold a beach ball under the water, but eventually, who wins? You or the ball? Because eventually that ball will find its way to the surface and it usually like explodes out of the water when it gets
Mm-hmm.
out from under your hands, right? And, I think that's a good kind of visual for what you're saying. You're right. It's going to show up. It will show up, and I think because over time, the pain diminishes,
Mm-hmm.
we feel like it's gone away, but it hasn't
No,
gone anywhere.
no.
It's just taken on a different form, a different
Mm-hmm.
shape,
Yeah.
right?
And I, in thinking about that too, and how we try and push it down every time we experience a form of grief, if we're not, I don't like the word confronting, but if we're not acknowledging it, we're not feeling it, we're not releasing it, we're not moving through it, and we're adding it to the stack, sometimes the big explosion is going to be from something so minor.
Yes,
And then all of a sudden you're exploding. You're like, why did I react that way? Well, it's because everything underneath, it's like a volcano, right? Things have just been building up and building up. And it doesn't take something catastrophic to bring it on. It could be, you know, you failed your driver's test, or you didn't get the promotion that you wanted. Now that's a big one, but it's not as big as my parents passed or I lost my spouse. It's sometimes it's the other little things that come up, or someone cuts you off in traffic and you find yourself bawling your eyes out on the side of the road and I'm realizing like this is just a little bit too extreme for what just happened. So,
absolutely.
yeah.
It's interesting with my husband. He's a pretty easygoing guy, right? He's pretty easy to be around. And a little while back, he started to be very short-tempered. He started
Mm,
to be very sarcastic. He had no patience, and our conversations were going south all the time.
mm,
And he's familiar with this process. And I said, you need to sit down and figure out what this is all about, right?
mm-hmm,
And so he processed one relationship, which helped, but that led to a second, which helped. And then he got to the third, and the floodgates opened, and he cried and
mm-hmm,
he cried, and he followed this process and completed that pain. But after he was done, he looked at me and said, I had no idea that was there.
mm-hmm.
None. And about an hour later, I checked in and I said, how you doing? He said, I'm back.
Wow.
You know, but he really had no idea. But I could see from the change in his behavior that something was off, because that
Yeah.
wasn't who he is.
Mm-hmm,
And I said, you need to figure this out. And he said, but I don't even know what's there. And I said, you need to figure it out.
mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it's so important when we get those kind of button pusher moments that we don't push through it, that we take the time. And whether it's with you or me or another grief support person, sometimes grief is just too personal to
Mm-hmm,
wade through it on your own.
mm-hmm,
And you need that guidance and that support, someone holding space, somebody
mm-hmm,
maybe bringing your attention to something that you hadn't thought of. And then being able to process, like you say, you have to go through it, can't go
mm-hmm.
around it,
Yeah.
but processing those emotions and bringing yourself back to this place of equilibrium.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Yeah, that's a great share and a great point to make. Thank you. All
Welcome.
right, we're going to move on to another couple of questions. We have a bit more time left. Does grief affect every aspect of our lives?
Oh, great question.
Yeah, that's a good
Yeah.
one.
Yeah, people say, do I have to grieve everything? And no, because we go through life relatively smoothly,
Mhm,
whether it's big losses, small losses, whatever. For the most part, we're able to process life as it comes to us. But if those things that start looping,
mhm,
those things that you keep hearing over and over and over, you start to, not be able to sleep. Maybe your patience level is lower. Maybe your eating habits have changed, or all those little things that you do to distract yourself kind of increase.
mhm,
Okay, that's a sign to you that what just happened, or maybe something that your body now is ready to deal with, those are the things you need to deal with. And the biggest thing is it loops.
mhm.
You're just thinking about it all the time. You're walking up and down the hall of your house arguing with someone that you haven't seen in 10 years.
Yeah.
right? But you're still having that same argument. And so, no, not everything needs to be resolved, but the things that are trying to get your attention, and even like my with the example of my husband, he didn't know,
Mm-hmm.
but he used the process to discover what it was. And then as soon as he was able to resolve those unresolved emotions, okay, it just,
Mm-hmm.
your body is designed to heal this stuff. And I think that's probably my biggest pet peeve. In our society, we've been taught that the length of time we grieve is a reflection of how much we cared for that person,
Oh,
right? Like, get
goodness.
over it too quickly.
Yeah.
Well, you didn't care. And yet, grieving is a normal and natural process that our body knows how to do.
Mm-hmm.
It knows how to do it till we get in the way. And so when your body is saying, you've got some unfinished business here you need to take care of, those are the things that you need to pause and resolve and not push down. I don't
Yeah.
know. Did I answer that question or did I
You
talk in
did.
circles?
You really did. And grief will, like, when it comes to affecting every aspect of your life, one of the things I'd love to add to that is that you may be feeling your grief at home, but it is going to come with you to work. It is going to come with you to the grocery store. It is going to come with you. My dog's losing it. Sorry that if anyone can hear her barking in the background. It'll come with you everywhere. It's going to come with you to daycare. It's going to come with you to the spa appointment. It's going to come with you everywhere that you go. Your own personal grief is never, you can't just put it in a suitcase and pop it aside. It is always going to be with you. And I work with a lot of women who are in the entrepreneurial space and high level in what they do, and trying to manage people and this business while grieving. They've tried to compartmentalize and that doesn't work for them, and that's why they end up coming to see me, because they're like, I can't figure out how to do this and still maintain all of what I need to maintain. So I think that was part of the point that I wanted to bring across with that question, is that, do you need to grieve every little thing? No, your body's going to work through stuff, but you do need to recognize that you can't leave it at home. When they say, oh, leave your personal stuff at home. Oh, there is no way. Yeah, okay. When you find me crying in the coffee, in the staff room or the break room, it's because I can't leave it at home. Right. So that was what I wanted to share with people. So don't think that you're going to be able to do that. Some
Yeah.
people surprisingly can make that distinction. It's very rare because it's still here. You don't take it out of your body and leave it at home. It comes with you as part of the package. So,
And I think too, careers can dictate that as well. Like
mm-hmm,
police officers, first responders, nurses, doctors, surgeons, all of those people that work in a profession where they are taught to compartmentalize their
mm-hmm,
emotions and need to do that in the moment,
right.
right? In the moment. But no, that moment will pass. And
Mm-hmm,
now you do need to go back and see, okay, did I walk through that okay? Or is there something that got caught? Is there
mm-hmm,
something I need to process? But because in those professions you put everything in a box,
mm-hmm.
you're right. That box gets fuller and fuller.
Yeah, it
And the
does.
next thing you know, you've got people off on stress leave.
Mm-hmm.
You know, people leave the profession altogether because they're just exhausted.
Yep.
And so, again, sometimes we're taught that in the profession that we've chosen, but it doesn't mean it went away.
No, not at
Right?
all. Yeah, great point to bring up. All right, last question before we finish up for today. I'm so glad that you were here. How would you feel if you had the courage to face your unresolved emotions? How do you think people would feel if they had the courage to face their unresolved emotions?
Well, I'm going to use myself as a personal example in there.
Okay.
I thought I was doing okay till I found grief recovery. I really thought I was doing okay. And through this, what I realized, the fight and flight that I had lived through my whole life, my adrenals on high alert, that imposter syndrome, lack of confidence, people pleasing, all of that stuff was actually a trauma response that I'd never dealt with. And so, relationship by relationship, event by event, I started to clear the deck and I started to complete and resolve those unresolved emotions. And where I sit today is I have an inner peace that I never thought I would find. You know, the imposter syndrome, gone. People pleasing, gone. Needing outside validation, gone. But I think the biggest thing is, just to be able to live in a state of calm
Mhm.
rather than in a constant state of anxiety. And if you had met me back then, you would have literally seen the same person in front of you. I worked very hard to stay authentic and stand in my integrity. But what you wouldn't have seen is, the duck's feet under the water going
Mhm.
90. On the surface, they seem really calm, but underneath, their feet are going. Well, that's what it was like inside my body. And I can remember being on a hike in Elora and saying to my husband one day, I can't believe that you don't see the difference in me. And he said, well, I see that you're more outgoing and I see that you want to go out and do more things. But he said that fear, that anxiety, all of those pent up emotions, I never felt them in the first place.
Mhm.
So I'm not going to notice internally in my body that they've left. And I thought that was a brilliant observation because the only person that will really feel the difference is you. But as you change your energy and you change how you show up, the people in your life will benefit from that because you are going to show up differently.
Oh, I agree. I agree. Having gone through my own grief healing journey as well, 100% can relate to what you were just saying. It is such a beautiful place to be on the other side.
Yeah.
You still will always carry your grief with you. It's not like you unload it and it goes away. It's it's processing, it's feeling it, it's giving it that acknowledgement. Because when something happens to you, it never doesn't not happen, right? You have a memory, you have an experience that never changes. How you deal with the emotional side of that is where you find the growth and the peace and the calm and the ability to move forward and find joy again, take risks again, put yourself out there again, go for that other job, get into that new relationship, all of the things.
And I think we stop trying to rewrite an ending
Mm-hmm.
that we wish hadn't happened,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you're right, it doesn't change what has happened, but it empowers us
Mm-hmm.
to respond instead of react.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the huge difference. And that's what makes all of this so important. And I think, you touched on something that I think the listeners need to understand as well when they're choosing someone. Always choose someone who's done their own work first.
Mm-hmm.
Always. Because you and I will show up much differently for our clients than someone who hasn't. Because we're not trying to heal our own pain. By helping someone else, we're able to 100% be focused on that other person, their journey, and
Mm-hmm.
providing the support they need. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really important for the listeners to hear.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I'm glad you brought that up. Glad you brought that up. Tammy, it has been a pleasure having you here today. Thank you so very much. I wanted to share with the listeners too that Tammy has an amazing website with a lot of free resources that you can access and go look at anytime. I will make sure that all of her contact information and her website are in the show notes down below. So be sure to check them out. Tammy, any last words before we sign off for today?
Just thank you so much for once again allowing this conversation to take place. I think the more these conversations take place, the more normal this topic will become. And that's when the real healing is going to start. So thank you.
Oh, you're very, very welcome. I really appreciate you taking the time to come and talk with us today. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you found value in today's episode, please feel free to share it with anyone that you think would benefit from listening. And stay tuned for the next time that we have Grief, the Emotional Shitstorm You Never Signed Up For. Have a great day.